Before her husband uttered a single word, the divorce papers landed on her hospital blanket. Eleanor was helpless, completely unable to move. She was nursing 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a fractured pelvis. She had been dreaming that Grant would appear, squeeze her hand, and promise her everything would be okay. Instead, he brought a legal
Everything you need is
document.
on there.
He suggested she sign it,
I
while the
understand the risk.
painkillers were keeping her numb. Then he checked his watch, not once, but twice, as if she were just another appointment in his packed schedule. But Grant made one colossal mistake that day. He had absolutely no idea who his wife's long-lost father truly was. He was a secret trillionaire. Grant was unaware that this father had been watching from the shadows for 15 years. He also had no clue that 6 months ago, the same father had quietly purchased Grant's entire company. Every last dollar Grant had embezzled, every hidden bank account, and every lie he had ever spun had been meticulously recorded. What happens when a man who thinks he is untouchable learns he has been playing a game with the person who owns the entire board? You have to stick around to see what comes next, because the second Grant walks into that boardroom and realizes who is really in charge will leave you absolutely stunned. But first, here's the lesson this story teaches. Sometimes the door to our own cage has been unlocked the entire time. We feel stuck, not because we are truly trapped, but because we are too afraid to walk away. The people who hurt us depend on our fear. They count on our silence. They bank on us believing we are only worth what they say we are. This story is for every woman who has ever been made to feel insignificant. It is for anyone who has stayed in a terrible place because getting out felt impossible. It is for anyone who needs a reminder. Learning that asking for help is not weakness, but the first step toward freedom. The divorce papers landed on her hospital bed before her husband even said hello. Eleanor Whitmore was completely still. She had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a pelvis that was shattered into pieces. For 3 long days, she had laid in that bed, just hoping Grant would take her hand. She hoped he would tell her that everything was going to be okay. She was waiting for the man she had loved for 12 years to finally act like her husband. But instead, he showed up with papers to end their marriage. Grant just stood there at the foot of her bed, wearing his perfectly fitted Italian suit. His tie was knotted just right, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked less like a man visiting his injured wife and more like a businessman about to close a major deal. He told her she should sign the papers now while the pain medicine was still working. He then glanced at his expensive watch not once, but twice, as if she were just another appointment on his busy schedule. But Grant Whitmore made a terrible mistake that day. He had no idea his wife had a father she hadn't spoken to in years, a father who was secretly a trillionaire. He didn't know that this father had been watching him for the last 15 years. And only 6 months ago, that father had silently bought up every single piece of Grant's company. Every stolen dollar, every secret account, and every single lie Grant had ever constructed had been carefully documented. What happens when a man who believes he is invincible finds out he is just a player in a game controlled by someone with endless power? And what happens when a woman who thought she had nothing left discovers she holds all the cards to reclaim her life? This is not just a story about revenge. This is a story about a woman who thought she needed someone to save her, only to discover she could be her own hero all along. You will want to watch this until the very end, because the moment Grant strides into that boardroom and finds his wife sitting in the chairman's seat will leave you speechless. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room hummed overhead. The heart monitor beeped in a steady, calm rhythm. The morphine pump clicked every few seconds. sending another wave of relief into her arm. For 72 hours, she had stared at the ceiling, counting the acoustic tiles, just waiting for Grant. The accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. A drunk driver had blasted through a red light and slammed directly into the driver's side of Eleanor's car. She remembered the horrifying shriek of twisting metal. She remembered the feeling of the world flipping upside down. She remembered waking up in the emergency room to the sounds of doctors shouting numbers that made no sense. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a fractured pelvis. The surgery took 6 hours. The doctor explained that her recovery would take at least 3 months. And through all of it, Grant never showed up. On the first day, he had flowers delivered. They were a generic arrangement from the hospital gift shop. The card simply read, "Thinking of you. Get well soon." There was no signature and no promise that he would visit. They were just flowers that were already starting to wilt. On the second day, he sent a text message. It said he was swamped with meetings, but would try to stop by tomorrow. Now it was the third day, and Grant had finally arrived. But he was not there to offer comfort. He was not there to hold her hand, or smooth her hair, or tell her he loved her. He was there to dissolve their marriage. Eleanor gazed at the thick manila envelope on her blanket. The words printed on it seemed to swim before her eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. "I have been doing some thinking," Grant began. His voice had the same cool, measured tone he used for his business presentations. "This seems like the right time for us to part ways." Eleanor tried to sit up, but a blinding pain shot through her chest. She gasped and fell back against the pillows. "Grant," she whispered, her voice rough and weak from disuse. "What are you talking about?" He pulled a chair closer to her bed, not to sit with her, but to make his case. He sat down and crossed his legs, as if they were having a casual chat over coffee. "I have already moved my things out of the house," he informed her. "I'm staying at the Riverside Hotel for now, until I find a new place. My attorney has highlighted all the relevant sections in the paperwork. You should sign it while the drugs are still making you feel comfortable." Eleanor let out a short laugh. The sound was a surprise, even to her. It was a hollow sound, filled with disbelief and muffled by morphine, and it made her broken ribs scream in protest. "You have to be joking," she said. "This must be some kind of sick joke." But then she looked into his face, and she saw the truth in his cold blue eyes. He was completely serious. He had planned this entire thing. He had timed it perfectly, with the same cold precision he used as the chief financial officer of his company. He waited until she was utterly helpless, heavily medicated, and too weak to fight back. "Grant," her voice cracked, "we have been married for 12 years. "Precisely," he answered. 12 years is more than enough time to know when something is not working." He checked his watch again, and the small gesture felt like a slap across her face. "I will give you some time to review it," he went on. "My lawyer needs the signed documents by Friday. That gives you 3 days. I think that is more than fair." Fair? He believed that abandoning his injured wife and demanding a divorce, while she could not even get out of bed, was fair? Grant stood up. He brushed imaginary lint from his pristine trousers. He adjusted his tie. He gave her one final chilly look. Those were the same eyes that once looked at her with love, or at least what she had thought was love. "I will be in touch," he said, and with that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sterile, quiet room. Eleanor just stared at the manila envelope. She found herself staring at the wilting flowers on the nightstand. She gazed up at the ceiling tiles, which she had memorized over the last 72 hours. Not a single tear fell from her eyes. She was in too much shock to even cry. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her. She slowly reached for it, and a jolt of pain shot through her broken body with the tiny movement. The screen lit up with an unknown number. It was the very same number that had called her 6 times already that week. She had ignored it every time, assuming it was a sales call. This time, however, the person had left a message. The words popped up on her screen. Eleanor, this is extremely important. I am aware of what your husband is planning. I know this because I am the one who... And right there, the message just stopped. Eleanor stared at the incomplete sentence. Her heart started to pound in her chest, and the monitor next to her began to beep faster and faster. A nurse rushed to her doorway. Mrs. Whitmore, is something wrong? Your heart rate just spiked. I am okay, Eleanor lied, the words coming out on their own. It was only a nightmare. The nurse went through the motions of checking her vitals, giving her more medication, and fluffing her pillow for the 100th time. Your husband stopped by a little while ago, the nurse said casually. He didn't stay very long. Is he coming back later? Eleanor's eyes drifted down to the divorce papers still sitting on her blanket. No, she replied in a faint voice. I really do not think he is. After the nurse left, silence filled the room once more. With hands that trembled, Eleanor reached for the envelope. She pulled out a thick stack of papers. They were filled with dense legal language, detailing the end of the life they had built together. Her eyes landed on a page marked with a small, arrow-shaped sticky note. In his perfect handwriting, Grant had simply written, "Sign here." He treated it like any other business deal he needed to finalize. Eleanor's mind drifted back to their wedding day. Hearing Grant's promises to stay with her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. It turned out that sickness was enough to break the contract. The unknown number called her phone again. Eleanor simply stared at the screen as it rang. It rang 3 times, then 4, then 5, before it finally went to her voicemail. Who could be calling her? How could they possibly know what Grant was doing? And how did anyone else know her marriage was falling apart? She did not have any answers, only a growing list of questions. All she had was a pile of divorce documents and a hollow feeling inside her, as if her entire world had been shattered into a million pieces that could never be put back together. The morphine began to pull her towards sleep. She fought against the drowsiness. She tried to make sense of everything that had just occurred, but the medicine was just too strong. Her final thought before she drifted off was of Grant's face. It was the way he had looked at her, or more accurately, the way he had avoided looking at her. It was as if she was already a ghost to him. It was as if he had already completely erased her from his life. It was as if she had never meant a thing to him at all. When Eleanor woke up, the morning light felt sharp against her eyes. Someone had pulled back the curtains. Sunlight streamed into the room, seemingly unaware that her world had just ended. But she felt a little clear today. The doctors had reduced her morphine dosage, and as the mental fog began to lift, the harsh reality of the situation came crashing down on her. Grant's words replayed in her mind. This is for the best, for both of us. I have already moved my things out. You should sign this while you are still feeling okay. The coldness of his words was breathtaking. He had planned this down to the last detail. He chose a time when she was at her most vulnerable, too weak to argue, and unable to even get out of bed. Oh, I am going to destroy him, a voice said. Eleanor turned her head and saw Maureen DeLuca standing in the doorway. Mo, she whispered. Her best friend of 20 years was a nurse at this very hospital. The look on Mo's face told Eleanor that she already knew everything. Mo strode into the room, her nursing uniform rumpled from a long shift. Her dark hair was thrown into a messy bun, and her brown eyes were blazing with pure fury. The whole floor is talking about it, Mo said. That arrogant monster came in here yesterday. He served you divorce papers while you are lying here with a collapsed lung. You can barely breathe on your own. I swear to you, Eleanor, I will hunt him down and I will make him regret this. Eleanor's voice was barely audible. How did you know? Honey, We're in a hospital. Gossip spreads faster than a virus here. Everybody knows what is happening within 15 minutes. Mo pulled a chair right up to the bed. She took Eleanor's hand in both of hers. Her hands were warm and strong, and it was exactly the comfort Eleanor needed right then. "Tell me what happened," Mo said softly. "I want to know every single thing he said." And so Eleanor told her everything. She described the thick envelope, his calm and rational explanations, the way he kept glancing at his watch, and the Friday deadline he had given her. With every word, Mo's expression grew angrier. "That man is a complete snake," Mo said. "And there is something I should have told you years ago." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "Told me what?" Mo hesitated for a second. She looked toward the door, then back at Eleanor. Her face shifted, as if she had just made a very difficult choice. "Honey, I have kept this secret for 3 years. That man has been cheating on you. It started before you even had your hysterectomy." The room started to spin. Eleanor gripped the bed rails so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Who is she?" "Her name is Vivian Holt," Mo answered. "She is a junior executive at his company. I have seen them out together, Eleanor. I even have pictures." Mo pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her gallery and then showed the screen to Eleanor. It was a picture of Grant sitting at a restaurant with a woman. Their heads were leaning close together, and his hand was resting on her arm. The woman was younger than Eleanor, with blonde hair, and she was stunning. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire wardrobe. The next picture was of Grant's car parked in front of an apartment building, with the same woman walking toward it. And there was another photo after that, and another, and another. The pictures dated back 3 years. "Mo," Eleanor could barely speak. "Why did you not say anything to me?" "Because you were not ready to hear it," Mo said gently. "Anytime I tried to bring it up, you would immediately defend him. You would tell me that Grant was just working late. You would tell me he was under a lot of pressure," Mo went on. "You insisted that your marriage was just going through a tough spot, and that you two would work through it." Mo was right. Eleanor had said all of those things. She said them because she desperately wanted to believe they were true. She had ignored every single warning sign. The late nights he spent at the office, the new cologne he started wearing, and the way Grant stopped being close to her after the surgery. He had claimed he did not want to hurt her while she was healing. She thought he was being considerate, but the truth was, he had already given up on their marriage. He was already with somebody else. Her hysterectomy was 2 years ago. "I know, honey," Eleanor whispered. "He started pulling away while I was recovering. I thought it was my fault. I thought he did not find me attractive anymore. I thought—" Her voice broke. The tears finally came, hot and furious and shameful. Mo simply held her, while she cried. She did not offer any useless platitudes. She just sat with her. After the sobbing subsided, Eleanor's phone buzzed once more. It was the same unknown number. Before Eleanor could react, Mo snatched the phone. "Who is this?" Mo demanded into the phone. "She is in the hospital, you creep. Whatever you are selling, she is not buying it." There was a short pause on the other end. Then Mo's entire expression changed. Her mouth fell open. "Wait a minute," Mo said slowly. She handed the phone to Eleanor. It says this is your father." Eleanor took the phone with numb fingers. She slowly raised it to her ear. "Eleanor?" a man's voice asked. It was an older voice, but it was familiar in a way that made her stomach clench. "Eleanor, please, do not hang up the phone." "Dad?" she whispered. She had not talked to Raymond Calloway in 15 years, not since her mother's funeral, not since the day she learned he had been secretly wealthy while her mother was dying from cancer and while they were struggling to pay for her medical bills. She remembered that horrible day perfectly. Her mother had suffered a slow death because they could not afford the best possible care. Eleanor had called him a coward, a liar, and a monster. She had sworn to him that she would never speak to him again. And now, after all this time, here he was, calling from a private number while she was lying broken in a hospital bed. "What do you want from me?" Her voice was cold as ice. "I know what your husband is doing," Raymond said. "I know because I have been watching him for a while. I have already taken steps, Eleanor. I have taken steps to protect you." "I do not need you to protect me," she snapped back. "I do not need a single thing from you. Please, just listen to what I have to say. For the last 2 years, your husband has been moving your money. He has been putting your shared assets into secret bank accounts overseas. He plans on leaving you with absolutely nothing. Actually, it is worse than nothing. He plans on leaving you with all of his debt." Eleanor's heart began to pound. The monitor beside her bed started beeping faster and faster. Mo looked at her, her eyes wide with alarm. "How could you possibly know all of this?" Eleanor asked. "Because 6 months ago," he said, "I bought his company." The words did not make sense at first. It just did not seem possible. "What? Whitmore Technologies? You own Grant's company?" "I now control the majority of the shares through a different corporation." "Grant has no idea," he said. "Nobody has any idea. But I know every single thing he has done, Eleanor. I know about every dollar he has stolen from you, and every lie he has ever told. And I can help you get it all back. But you have to let me." Eleanor's hand was shaking so badly that the phone nearly slipped from her grasp. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this now? You have not called me in 15 years. You let Mom die. You let her suffer when you had enough money to save her. Why would you suddenly care about what happens to me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. Then he spoke in a quiet voice. "I have cancer, Eleanor. It is pancreatic, stage 4. The doctors say I have about a year left, and I could not bear the thought of dying while you still hated me." The phone fell from Eleanor's grasp, landing softly on the thin hospital blanket. She could hear Raymond's voice, small and distant. "Eleanor? Eleanor, are you still on the line?" Mo picked up the phone. She said something Eleanor could not understand, and then she hung up. "What on earth was all of that about?" Mo asked. Eleanor could only stare at the ceiling, at the white tiles she had spent the night before counting. Her husband was cheating on her and wanted a divorce. Her estranged father was dying and wanted her to forgive him. And she was trapped in a hospital bed with no way to run from any of it. "I do not know," she whispered. "I do not know anything at all anymore." The following morning, a man Eleanor had never laid eyes on before entered her hospital room. He was dressed in a well-tailored gray suit and held a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Dennis Oakley, an attorney. "I represent your father," Dennis stated. He set his briefcase on the very same chair Mo had sat in a day earlier. "He sent me to deliver some papers and to offer you some clarity." Eleanor's first impulse was to order him out, to shout at him until he left her in peace. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was his composed and businesslike demeanor. Or maybe it was simply the profound exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones. Or perhaps she was just desperate for some answers. "Speak," she commanded. Dennis clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a file thick with documents. "6 months ago, your father acquired a controlling stake in Whitmore Technologies, your husband's company. He did it using a shell corporation called Callaway Holdings. The whole transaction was perfectly legal and was handled with the utmost secrecy." "But why?" Eleanor asked. "Why would he want to buy Grant's company?" "Because 3 years ago, your father hired private detectives to watch over you from a safe distance. He simply wanted to be certain that you were safe." "And that you were happy," Dennis added, pausing for effect. He looked at Eleanor with a flicker of sympathy in his professional eyes. "He quickly learned that you were neither. 3 years. That was exactly how long Grant had been carrying on his affair. It was exactly how long Eleanor had been convincing herself that her marriage was perfectly fine." The investigators discovered proof of your husband's affair, Dennis continued. They also found evidence of financial crimes. Your husband has been embezzling money from his own company. It began with smaller sums, but the amounts grew larger. He has been hiding the money in accounts overseas. Accounts that he established using your name, without your knowledge, Dennis concluded. A wave of sickness washed over Eleanor. My name? If the theft is uncovered, you would be the one implicated. You could be facing criminal prosecution. Your husband has been setting you up to take the blame for his crimes. The room began to tilt. Eleanor gripped the bed rails to steady herself. That cannot be true, she said. Grant would never, he couldn't. But as the words left her mouth, she knew they were false. Grant could. Grant would. Grant had already revealed his true colors when he served her divorce papers in her hospital bed. That was only his most recent act of cruelty. Eleanor's thoughts drifted back to her wedding day. She recalled Grant's vows and all his promises. She recalled the look in his eyes, as if she were the center of his universe. She remembered their honeymoon in Italy, strolling hand in hand through the streets of Florence. Grant had pointed out the beautiful buildings and told her their history with all the excitement of a young boy. She had fallen for him even more deeply during those 2 weeks than in all the time they had been dating. She remembered arriving home from the hospital after her hysterectomy. Grant had filled her room with flowers. The card had said, "We do not need children. We have each other." She had cried with happiness, but now every one of those memories was poisoned. Now she understood them in a horrifying new way. Grant sent flowers because he was guilty. Grant said they did not need children because he was already planning his exit. Grant's joy on their honeymoon now seemed like just an act. It was all a show, a performance that had been carefully maintained for 12 years to conceal the man he really was. The lawyer's voice, Dennis's voice, pulled Eleanor out of her thoughts. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you all right?" "No," she said, her own voice shaking. "I am not all right. My husband cheated on me for 3 years. He stole our money and set me up to take the fall. He gave me divorce papers when I was too weak to even stand. And now you tell me my estranged father has been watching me this whole time, like some kind of mysterious guardian angel." Dennis cleared his throat. He would describe himself as a concerned parent. Eleanor's next words were sharp with bitterness. "He let my mother die. He was a rich man," she went on. "He could have paid for the finest doctors, the newest treatments. But no, he kept his money hidden and just watched as she faded away." Dennis waited for a moment before he said something that made her blood run cold. "Your mother asked him to." Eleanor went completely still in her hospital bed. "What did you just say?" "Your mother was aware of the money," Dennis explained softly. "She had known for a very long time. She made your father swear he would not use it for her medical care. She wanted him to keep it safe for you, for your future." "That is an absolute lie," Eleanor whispered. "It is the absolute truth. I was there when she made him give his word. I have been your father's attorney for 30 years. I saw how much that promise destroyed him." "And then," Dennis said gently, "I saw him get destroyed all over again when you cut him out of your life." Eleanor felt like she could not breathe. The heart monitor next to her bed began to beep faster and faster. A nurse peeked her head around the door frame. "Is everything okay in here?" the nurse asked, glancing at the monitor. "Your heart rate just spiked." "Fine," Eleanor managed to say. "We are fine." The nurse seemed doubtful, but eventually walked away. Dennis watched Eleanor with kind, steady eyes. "I am not here to convince you to forgive your father," he said. "I am here to tell you the truth, and to offer you a choice. You can sign the divorce papers your husband presented to you. You can leave with whatever crumbs he chooses to offer you. Or," he went on, "you can get up and fight with all of your father's resources supporting you." "I do not want his resources," she snapped back. I do not want a single thing from him. Then what is it that you do want? The question hung in the air of the quiet hospital room. Eleanor had no answer. She had wanted a happy life, a marriage filled with love. She had wanted to grow old with Grant. She had dreamed about having children, right up until the doctors said it was impossible. But none of that was real. It had never been real. It was just a story, built on the foundation of Grant's lies. Dennis stood up from his chair. He placed a small flash drive on her nightstand. "This contains everything," he said. "It has bank statements, private emails, and receipts for wire transfers. It is proof of every single dollar your husband embezzled. It identifies every secret account he controls. It lays out every single lie he has told his board of directors." Dennis then put a business card beside the drive. "Call me when you decide what you want to do. Your father is standing by, ready to help you, but only if you ask for it. The choice is entirely yours." He turned and walked out of the room, the door shutting with a soft click behind him. Eleanor could only stare at the little flash drive. It was such a tiny object to contain so much power. She picked up her phone and began scrolling through 3 years of photos. She was looking for the truth she had refused to see for so long. And she found it. At a company Christmas party, Grant was in the background, angled slightly away from her. A blonde woman, Vivian Holt, was standing right beside him. There was a picture from a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. Grant was staring down at his phone while Eleanor smiled at the camera, holding a glass of wine. His expression was distant, his thoughts obviously miles away. Then she found their anniversary dinner from the previous year. Grant's smile did not quite reach his eyes, while Eleanor was beaming, completely oblivious to the truth. She scrolled and scrolled, and the signs were everywhere, hidden in plain sight. She had just made a choice not to see them. That night, alone in the silence of her hospital room, Eleanor made a decision. She would not be signing Grant's papers. She would not be accepting his leftovers, and she was absolutely not going to let him win. For the first time in 3 long days, she felt something other than pain and confusion. She felt a powerful wave of anger. 3 days earlier than planned, Eleanor discharged herself from the hospital. She went against her doctor's orders, her friend Mo's loud objections, and every single part of her that screamed for her to rest and heal. But she could not heal in that room, not while staring at the ceiling. She could not just lie there and wait for Grant's lawyers to call with more threats. She had to take action. She had to get back in control of her own life, even if it was just starting with her own body. Mo assisted her into a wheelchair and then into Mo's old Honda Civic. Every small bump in the road sent a sharp pain through Eleanor's fractured ribs. She gritted her teeth and bore it. "Where are we headed?" Mo asked as she navigated out of the parking garage. Eleanor provided an address for a coffee shop in the downtown district. Mo's eyebrows shot up. "That is Vivian Holt's go-to spot. She is there every single morning." "How would you know that?" "Dennis informed me," Eleanor answered. "My father's team has been monitoring her as well." "Eleanor," Mo said, her voice filled with concern, "are you completely certain this is a good idea? You are going to go confront the other woman?" "I am not going there to confront her," Eleanor said with calm certainty. "I am going there to recruit her." The coffee shop was a stylish, pricey establishment that served things like $8 lattes and organic muffins. Eleanor picked a table in the corner, setting her walker next to her. Mo remained in the car on standby to rush inside if things went wrong. Vivian Holt entered at exactly 8:15 in the morning. She was blonde, beautiful, and about 4 years younger than Eleanor. Vivian entered the cafe with the kind of confidence that turned heads. She was impeccably dressed, a woman who seemed to have every detail of her life under perfect control. That was, until her eyes fell on Eleanor, sitting in a quiet corner. At that moment, all the color drained from Vivian's face. Eleanor offered a small, knowing wave. For a second, Vivian stood frozen near the doorway, and Eleanor thought she might just bolt. Instead, a new resolve hardened her expression. She took a slow, deep breath, walked directly to Eleanor's table, and sat down. "I had a feeling you would find me, eventually," Vivian said. "So you were expecting me?" Eleanor asked. "I was expecting something," Vivian confessed. "The wife of my boss appearing at my regular coffee spot seemed like a very real possibility." Eleanor carefully studied the woman seated across from her. She was looking for a sign of victory or pride, the classic smirk of a mistress who had won. But she found none of it. Instead, she saw deep exhaustion, fear, and something that looked surprisingly like relief. "You are not at all what I imagined," Eleanor said with honesty. Vivian's gaze flickered to Eleanor's walker, and the gentle way she held herself. "You are not what I imagined either. I heard about the car accident and the divorce papers. It is all anyone at the office has been talking about." "Does everyone at the office also know you are having an affair with my husband?" Eleanor asked point blank. Vivian flinched as if she had been struck. "A few of them suspect it," she admitted quietly. Grant was not exactly discreet. "No," Eleanor agreed, a bitter taste in her mouth. "He certainly was not." An uncomfortable silence hung between them, broken only by a barista calling out an order and the hiss of the espresso machine. "I did not know he was married," Vivian said, her voice almost a whisper. "Not when we first started seeing each other. He told me he was divorced. By the time I discovered the truth, it was too late." Eleanor felt her entire perspective shifting. She had come here prepared to despise this woman, to face a villain, but what she was discovering was just another one of Grant's victims. "You tried to end it with him," Eleanor stated. "It was not a question." Vivian nodded. "3 times. Vivian's hands trembled as she clutched her coffee cup. "And every time he threatened me. He threatened my job, my reputation, my entire future. He promised he would completely ruin me if I ever told a single person about our relationship." Eleanor leaned forward, her own physical pain forgotten for a moment. This was why she had come. "What else did he threaten you about?" Vivian's eyes nervously scanned the coffee shop, making sure no one was close enough to listen. She leaned in closer. "Grant has been using me to launder money," she whispered. "He opened accounts using my name that I never knew about. He made wire transfers from my bank that I never gave permission for. If anyone begins looking into the embezzlement, my name is going to be on every single document. I could go to prison, Eleanor, for terrible crimes that I did not commit." The pieces of the puzzle began to snap together in Eleanor's mind. Grant was not simply unfaithful. He was using Vivian in the exact same way he had been using her. They were both just tools in his elaborate game, people meant to take the fall when his whole dishonest world finally collapsed. "Do you have any proof of this?" Eleanor asked. "I have everything," Vivian answered. "Bank records, emails, even secret recordings. I have been collecting it all for months, just trying to figure out a way to escape this mess without him dragging me down with him." "Why did you not go to the police?" "Because Grant threatened my life," Vivian said, her voice becoming even quieter. "He said if I ever spoke to a soul, he would make certain I took all the blame. He bragged that he has powerful friends, top lawyers, and people who could make me disappear. And I believed him." Eleanor thought about the flash drive in her purse. It contained the evidence her father had collected, evidence that could rescue both of them and bury Grant for good. "What if I told you there was another way out of this?" Eleanor said. "A way to expose Grant, where neither of us has to take any of the blame." A small spark of hope flickered in Vivian's wide eyes. "How?" "My father owns Grant's company." "Grant is completely unaware," Eleanor explained. "Almost nobody knows. But my father can see everything that happens. He has access to every document, every single transaction, and every lie that Grant has ever told." The words seemed to hang in the air. Vivian stared at Eleanor, as if she had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Your father owns Whitmore Technologies? But that is not possible. The parent company is a huge European corporation called Callaway Holdings. Callaway, Eleanor said with a faint smile, is my maiden name. Vivian's mouth fell open. She leaned back in her chair, her untouched cup of coffee completely forgotten on the tabletop. Why are you telling me any of this? Vivian finally asked. Because I need your evidence, Eleanor said plainly. I need the proof that you have gathered to add to what my father already possesses. And in return for your help? In return for what? Vivian pressed. In return, I will personally make sure the investigation completely clears your name. Every document you were forced to sign will be exposed as Grant's forgery. Every account opened with your name will be linked to his crimes. You will walk away from all of this completely free. That sounds far too good to be true, Vivian said, her voice full of suspicion. Maybe it is, Eleanor acknowledged, but it is the only real choice you have. Vivian reached into her handbag and took out a small flash drive. It was identical to the one Eleanor's father had given her. I have kept this with me every single day for the past 6 months, Vivian said. I was just waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone with the power to actually use it to stop him. She pushed the small drive across the table. I am not doing this for you, Vivian said, looking Eleanor directly in the eyes. I am doing this because I refuse to go to prison for that man. Eleanor picked up the flash drive. It felt heavy in her palm, full of years of lies, proof of Grant's evil, and the key to her own future. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly. Do not thank me just yet, Vivian responded. When Grant is cornered, he becomes very dangerous. So whatever your plan is, you must be careful. Eleanor slipped the flash drive into her pocket and reached for her walker. She paused and said, One last question. Did you ever really love him, Vivian? Was any of it real for you? Vivian was silent for a long moment before she finally shook her head. I believed I did, in the beginning, but you cannot love a person who does not actually exist. Grant only showed me an act, a character he was playing. The real Grant is whoever he needs to be to get what he wants. I was useful to him, and that is all. And when I was no longer useful, he would have thrown me away, just like he is trying to throw you away. Vivian stood. For what it is worth, I am sorry about everything. I am sorry for my part in this, even though I did not know, and for not speaking to you much sooner. You are speaking to me now, Eleanor replied. That is what is important. Vivian gave a single sharp nod. Then she turned and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping back into her own world. She left Eleanor sitting by herself with 2 flash drives and the incredible weight of the secrets they contained. Raymond Callaway's property was spread across 50 acres of rolling hills just outside of the city. Eleanor had never seen it before. In 15 years of being cut off from him, she never even knew where her father's house was located. The house was enormous, a modern masterpiece of stone and glass that looked like it was taken from an architecture magazine. But the grounds were calm, with beautiful gardens, a small lake, and an orchard of apple trees. Raymond met her at the massive front door. He looked much sicker than she had imagined. The cancer was winning. His expensive suit hung on his thin frame like it was on a hanger. His face was gaunt and his eyes were tired. But they were her eyes, the same hazel green she saw in her own reflection every morning. Thank you for coming all this way, he said. Thank you for finally telling me the truth, she answered. He led her through the huge house into a study where the walls were covered with books. A fire was burning in the fireplace, even though it was a warm spring day. Eleanor lowered herself into a soft leather armchair, her body protesting after the long car ride. Dennis tells me you're meeting with Vivian was successful, Raymond said. It depends on what you call successful. She gave me her evidence. She is willing to help us. Good, he said. That is very good. Eleanor studied her father's face, looking for the cold-hearted villain she had created in her memory 15 years ago, for the man who let her mother die. But all she saw was a frail old man, a dying man, a man who was looking at her with an expression that could have been hope. I need you to tell me the full story, Eleanor said. About Mom, about all of it. Dennis said that she knew about the money, and that she made you promise not to spend it on her medical bills. Is that true? Raymond was quiet for a long time, just watching the flames dance. Yes, he finally said. It is true. But why? Why would she ever do that? Because she knew where that money came from, he said, turning to look at her with tears in his eyes. I was not always a good man, Eleanor. In my youth, I did things that I am not proud of. I made business choices that destroyed people's lives. I crushed my competition. I turned my back on my partners. Your mother knew about all of it. She stood by me through everything. But she refused to let any of that money be used to save her own life. She called it blood money. She said she would choose to die before that money ever helped her. And you just let that happen? You just watched her die? What else could I do? Raymond's voice was shaking. She was my wife. She made me swear on everything that mattered to me. She made me promise I would honor her decision. And I kept that promise, even though it shattered me. Even though I have lived with that regret every single day since she's been gone. Eleanor felt her eyes start to fill with tears, but she quickly blinked them back. If you want to hate me, you have every right to, Raymond continued. I hate myself. I have for 15 years. But your mother asked me to do something else. She wanted me to look out for you, to protect you from a distance. She told me to step in only if you were ever in serious danger. He reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a stack of old envelopes. They were yellow with age and tied together with a faded piece of ribbon. These are her letters, Raymond said. She wrote them to you over the years. She would write one whenever something big happened in your life. The day you graduated from college, the day you got married, the time you got that huge promotion at your job. She wrote to you, even though she knew she wouldn't be there to see any of it happen. Eleanor took the bundle of letters with hands that trembled. She asked me to hold on to them for you until the time was right, Raymond explained. I've been waiting for 15 years, wondering if this day would ever come. Eleanor gently untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated 3 months before her mother died. The handwriting was shaky, but it was unmistakably hers. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I am no longer with you. And I am so sorry for that, my sweet girl. I am sorry that I had to leave you. I am sorry for the secrets we had to keep. I am sorry for everything I couldn't explain to you while I was still alive. Your father loves you more than you can possibly know, and certainly more than he ever knew how to show you. He has made awful mistakes, but so have I. We all make them. Don't let anger ruin your life, Eleanor. Don't allow bitterness to poison all the years you have ahead of you. Your father needs you, and whether you see it now or not, you need him as well. I love you. I have always loved you, and I will always love you. Be brave, my darling. Be kind, and please, be happy. Forever yours, Mom. Eleanor's vision became a blur as tears finally streamed down her cheeks. 15 years of anger, 15 years of not speaking, and this whole time her mother had been hoping they would find their way back to each other. She wanted us to find each other again, Raymond said in a soft voice. She truly believed that we would when the time was right. Eleanor read letter after letter. It was as if her mother's voice was speaking to her from the past, her words filled with wisdom, affection, and forgiveness. By the time she finally looked up, several hours had passed. The fire in the fireplace had burned down to glowing red embers. Raymond had been sitting there quietly the whole time, giving her the space she needed. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Eleanor said at last. "Not for everything. Not right now. I am not asking you to forgive me." "Then what are you asking for?" "Time," he replied. "Whatever time I have left. I don't want to die a stranger to my own daughter." Eleanor looked at her dying father. This was the man she had hated for 15 years, the man who had secretly been her guardian angel all along. "I don't want that either," she whispered. She didn't hug him. They weren't ready for that. But she did reach across the table that separated them and took his hand. His hand felt weak and fragile in hers. It was the hand of a man who knew his journey was coming to an end. "So, what are your plans for Grant?" Raymond asked. "I want justice," Eleanor said, her voice full of resolve. "For me, for you, for Vivian, for every single person he has ever wronged." "And what if he won't give you justice?" "Then we will take it from him," she replied. A sad smile touched Raymond's lips, but his eyes were filled with pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said. "I hope so," Eleanor answered, squeezing his hand. "I really, really hope so." 2 weeks later, Eleanor sat across from Grant at a dinner table. He had picked the restaurant. He had picked the time. He truly thought he was the one in control. He was very wrong. Eleanor had made a point to get there early. She had chosen her outfit carefully. She wore a navy blue dress that made her feel powerful, along with her mother's pearl earrings. She was even wearing heels, which still sent waves of pain through her healing pelvis. Each piece she put on was like a piece of armor for the battle ahead. She was now able to walk without her walker. It was a slow and painful process, but she was standing on her own 2 feet, and that meant everything. Grant showed it up at 7 o'clock on the dot. He was wearing his charming smile like it was a mask. He kissed her on the cheek, as if they were just old friends meeting for a meal. He ordered a very expensive bottle of wine without even asking what she wanted. That was something he always did. "You look incredible," Grant said. "So much better than when I saw you in the hospital." "Thank you," she replied. "I am feeling stronger." "I am glad you decided to meet with me," he went on. "I am sure we can sort this out like 2 civilized adults. There is no reason to involve lawyers and drag this out. We can just have a clean break." Eleanor took a small sip of her wine. It was a fantastic year. Grant always had the best taste in wine. His moral compass was broken, but his taste in wine was flawless. "I had my lawyer draw up a new settlement," Grant said. "It is much more generous than the first offer. I think you will find it is more than fair." "How generous are we talking?" "You get to keep the house, your car, and enough money to cover all your medical expenses. It is a very reasonable offer, Eleanor." He was trying to give her crumbs from a feast he had been secretly cooking up for years. He thought she knew nothing about the offshore bank accounts, the hidden properties, and the stolen money, and he actually seemed to believe she should be thankful for this so-called generosity. "I have been doing a lot of thinking about our marriage," Eleanor said, her voice perfectly calm. "All 12 years of it. I was just wondering when you changed. Was it a slow thing? Or did it happen all at once? I am just curious." Grant's smile flickered for just a moment. This was obviously not how he expected the evening to go. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for you anymore. When did you start planning your new life? When did you start seeing Vivian?" For a split second, all the color drained from his face, but he quickly put his confident mask back on. "Eleanor, I don't know what you think you have heard, but I have heard everything, Grant, and I have also seen everything. I have seen the pictures of you and Vivian together. I have seen the bank records from the accounts you thought I never knew about. I have seen the emails you sent to your lawyer, where you planned exactly how to leave me with absolutely nothing. That is not true. I have also been having some very interesting talks with my father. You do remember my father, Raymond, correct? We met him at our wedding. He has taken a very sudden interest in your professional life lately. He is especially captivated by what you have been doing at Whitmore Technologies." Grant placed his wine glass on the table, and she could see his hand was shaking. "Your father? You two have not spoken in ages. We are getting to know each other again. He has been unbelievably helpful. In fact, he has been very informative." Eleanor leaned forward, delighting in the expression on his face. "Are you aware that he has been tracing your offshore bank accounts? Every single wire transfer, every fraudulent invoice, and every last dollar you have siphoned from your own company." The blood drained from Grant's face, turning it a ghostly white. For the first time since she had ever met him, he appeared genuinely terrified. "Eleanor," he stammered, his voice tight with panic. "Whatever you believe you know, I know that you have been secretly stealing money for the past 3 years. I know you have used my name to set up fake accounts. I know you were planning to abandon me to handle the consequences while you escaped with your mistress and all the money you took. That is absurd. There is no way you can prove any of that." "Actually, I can prove it. Vivian was incredibly cooperative. She provided me with a large collection of evidence, and it all lines up perfectly." As my father's investigators presented the facts, Grant's jaw clenched, and his charming facade crumbled completely. "What is it you want?" he asked harshly. "I want a divorce that is equitable. I want an accurate list of everything we own as a couple, and I want half of it. That also includes the money you attempted to conceal." "And what if I refuse?" Eleanor gave him a smile, that held no warmth at all. "In that case, my father will hand his evidence over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You will likely spend the next 10 to 15 years inside a federal prison. The decision is yours, Grant." She stood up from her chair. Every single motion sent a jolt of pain through her body, which was still healing, but she would not let him see her weakness. She picked up her purse from the table and left a $20 bill to cover her glass of wine. "I will be in contact," she said to him. "Oh, and Grant, your deadline to decide is this Friday. I believe that gives you more than enough time." She walked directly out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind her, she could hear Grant yelling her name. His tone shifted from demanding to threatening, and finally to pleading for her to return. She never turned around. Mo was already waiting for her in the parking lot. She saw the expression on Eleanor's face and smiled. "So, how did it go?" "I made him very uncomfortable." "Good. He deserves to feel uncomfortable. He deserves a lot worse than that." Eleanor cautiously eased herself into the car. Once the rush of bravery faded, her hands started to shake. "I cannot believe I just did that," she whispered. "I cannot believe I threatened my own husband with federal prison." "Your ex-husband?" Mo corrected her softly. "He is going to be your ex-husband soon, right?" "Yes, soon-to-be ex-husband." Eleanor let out a laugh, and the sound of it surprised even her. It felt wonderful. Mo shifted the car into drive. "Where are we headed?" "We are going to my father's estate. We have a lot of work ahead of us." But Grant was not the type to give up without a fight. 3 days after they met, a certified letter arrived from his attorneys. It was not a settlement offer. It was a threat. Grant was making a completely new claim. He was now accusing her of being part of his scheme to steal the money. He said that the secret bank accounts overseas were her idea. He insisted that she had been manipulating him from the very beginning and was now trying to frame him to protect herself. To make things worse, he was suing her for the house, for all the assets they owned together, and for the emotional distress his lies had supposedly caused her. Eleanor read the letter from top to bottom 3 times. With every word, she felt a chill run down her spine. "He is fighting back with everything he has," she told Dennis. "He is actually trying to make me look like the bad guy in this whole mess." "That was always his backup plan," Dennis replied. "If he knew he could not get away with it, he was going to drag you down into the dirt right along with him, The real question is whether anyone will actually believe his side of the story. And will they? Dennis simply shook his head. Not with the evidence we have, but he does not know about that yet. He believes you are making everything up. He is convinced that your father's involvement is a total bluff. So, what should we do next? We are going to call his bluff. The week that followed was a dizzying blur of legal meetings and detailed planning. Dennis assembled an entire team of lawyers, financial analysts, and private detectives. They all worked together to build a case against Grant that was absolutely airtight. Grant, however, had his own resources. He had powerful connections and friends in high places. He immediately began spreading rumors about Eleanor. He told their shared acquaintances that she was emotionally unstable. He claimed the accident had left her with brain damage and that she was making up crazy stories because she could not cope with the divorce. Some people actually started to believe him. Eleanor noticed people giving her strange looks at the grocery store. Friends she had known for years suddenly stopped returning her phone calls. Someone even tucked a hateful note under her windshield wiper that simply said, "Gold digger." But the deepest cut came when Grant managed to turn his own sister, Charlotte Whitmore, against her. She called Eleanor one evening, screaming into the phone. "How could you possibly do this to him?" Charlotte yelled through the phone. "He gave you an amazing life. He loved you so much. And this is how you repay him?" "Charlotte," Eleanor began, fighting to keep her voice from shaking, "your brother has been cheating on me for the last 3 years. He has been stealing money from his own company. He served me with divorce papers while I was lying in a hospital bed. Lies! Those are all lies. Grant told me you would say things like this. He said you planned this for months, that you tricked him into the marriage, and that you have been playing everyone from the very start." The line went dead. For hours that night, Eleanor just sat alone in the darkness. She started to wonder if she was really doing the right thing. She questioned if the truth even mattered when it seemed so much easier for people to believe a lie. Mo found her at 2 in the morning. She was sitting in the bathtub, fully clothed, as cold water ran over her. "Oh, sweetie." Mo gently helped her out of the tub. She wrapped her in a stack of warm towels and made her sip a cup of hot tea. "What is going on?" "Everyone believes him," Eleanor whispered, her teeth chattering from the cold. "Everyone thinks I am the crazy one, the gold digger, the manipulator." "Not everyone," Mo said softly. "Enough of them do. Enough to make me wonder if I am the one who is wrong." Mo sat down on the floor next to her and took her hand. "This is how men like him operate," Mo said quietly. "They are charming. That is how they get away with their terrible behavior for so long. They convince the entire world they are the good guy and that their victim is the one causing all the problems. This is not about you, Eleanor. It is about how skilled he is at lying." "What if I cannot win?" "Then you lose while fighting," Mo said with determination. "But you do not let him win by just giving up." Eleanor looked at her best friend, the only person who had supported her through everything. Mo was the one who saw the truth when nobody else wanted to. "I am terrified," Eleanor admitted. "I have never been so scared in my whole life." "Good. Being scared means you understand what you could lose, but you are not going through this by yourself. You have me, you have your father, and you have the truth on your side. And the truth really does matter, Eleanor, even when it feels like it does not." The next morning, Eleanor woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She was tired of defending herself. She was done waiting for Grant to make his next attack. It was time to take the battle to him. 3 weeks later, Grant Whitmore walked into the quarterly meeting for the board of directors. Inside the walls of Whitmore Technologies, he felt completely untouchable. His financial reports looked spectacular, and his presentation was flawless. The company's new majority shareholder was finally attending in person, and Grant was prepared to make a great first impression. He had spent the last month doing damage control. Eleanor's threats at the restaurant had made him nervous at first. But his lawyers assured him she had no real evidence to use against him. The secret accounts were hidden too well. The proof, they claimed, was non-existent. His smear campaign was working perfectly. Eleanor was just bluffing. She had to be. The boardroom started to fill up with the familiar faces. There were directors Grant had known for decades, the chief financial officer from the parent corporation, and the company's legal team. But then, two people walked in that Grant did not recognize. The first was a sharply dressed man in a very expensive suit. His name tag identified him as Dennis Oakley, General Counsel for Callaway Holdings. The second person was a woman. She wore a simple navy blue dress and a string of pearl earrings. She moved with a slow, careful pace, like a person who was still healing from a major injury. Grant felt his heart stop cold. "Eleanor," Grant managed to say, his own voice sounding strained and foreign. "Eleanor, what on earth are you doing here?" Eleanor said nothing at all. She walked straight to the head of the enormous conference table. It was the chair reserved for the majority shareholder. She sat down. Dennis stood beside her and opened his briefcase. "The agenda for this meeting has been updated," Dennis announced to get everyone in the room. "Instead of discussing our quarterly profits, we will be addressing some financial irregularities that have recently come to our attention. To be specific, a pattern of embezzlement that has been occurring for the past 3 years." Grant opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "We have bank records," Dennis continued, "along with confirmations of wire transfers. We also have fraudulent invoices and internal company communications. They all point to a deliberate theft of company funds." He pushed a document down the polished table. It was an authorization form for a transfer to a hidden offshore account, and Grant's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. "We also have a sworn statement from Vivian Holt," Dennis added. "She is a junior executive who was unknowingly used to help launder the stolen money. She has provided signed affidavits detailing her role and Mr. Whitmore's manipulation." Another document, another signature. Another part of the trap snapped shut around Grant. "And finally, we have been assisting federal investigators. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been quietly building its own case for the last 6 weeks. This meeting today will determine if this company will offer its full cooperation with their ongoing investigation." Grant finally managed to find his voice. "This is absurd. These documents are forgeries. This is a hostile takeover, disguised as a criminal probe." "The documents are all 100% authentic," Eleanor said, her voice steady and clear. "Every word, every signature, every single dollar. I have financial analysts who can verify every transaction. I have digital forensics experts who can trace every single transfer." She then stood up and walked slowly toward the chair where Grant was sitting. She looked down at him, her eyes showing no pity and no fear, just the cold, hard truth. "And I have 12 years of marriage that taught me exactly the kind of man you are. The board will now hold a vote on the immediate suspension of Mr. Whitmore from all his duties," Dennis announced. "All those in favor?" Every single hand in the boardroom went up. Every director Grant had charmed and deceived for years. Every person he was sure was on his side. "The board will now vote on providing full cooperation with federal investigators. All in favor?" Again, every hand went up. "The board will now vote to terminate Mr. Whitmore's employment. For cause, effective immediately. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. Grant slammed both of his palms down on the table. "You cannot do this to me. I am the one who built this company. I made every one of you millions of dollars. You owe me." "We do not owe you a single thing," one of the directors said. It was a woman Grant had always ignored, thinking she was just a seat filler. "You stole from your own company. You lied to this board. You forged documents, and you manipulated your own staff. You should consider yourself lucky that we are only firing you and not filing charges ourselves. We will leave the criminal charges to the professionals, Eleanor said calmly. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been extremely an interest in your very creative accounting. Two security guards materialized in the doorway. Grant scanned the room one final time, frantically looking for a supportive face, an ally, or anyone at all who would defend him. He saw no one. They escorted him from the building. He was holding a small cardboard box filled with his personal items. His nameplate, his diplomas, and a photograph from his wedding day, which he abandoned in the parking lot. Eleanor observed the entire scene from the boardroom window. Mo came to stand next to her. "How are you feeling?" Mo asked softly. "I am not sure," Eleanor replied with honesty. "I expected to feel satisfied." "I do not feel victorious," Eleanor admitted in a low voice. "I just feel exhausted." "That is completely understandable," Mo said, putting an arm around her shoulder. "You have just been through a battle. You have every right to be exhausted." Eleanor watched as Grant's car exited the parking lot. She watched him drive away from the life he had utterly ruined with his own greed and cruelty. It was finally done. Or at least, it was nearly done. The divorce became official 6 months later. Grant had pleaded guilty to lesser charges after his attorneys worked out a deal. He received 18 months in a minimum security prison, a fine he would have trouble paying, and the complete end of his career in the financial world. Eleanor did not attend the sentencing. She had no desire to see him wearing handcuffs. She did not require the kind of closure that would come from seeing him suffer. The thing she needed was peace, and she knew peace was not something she could discover in a courtroom. The settlement awarded her half of their legal marital property, which was the house, her car, and enough funds to begin a new life. The stolen money was tracked down and returned to the company. Vivian Holt's reputation was fully restored. She relocated to Seattle once everything was over and began a new career in a different field. 2 months after the legal proceedings, Charlotte Whitmore left her a tearful voicemail. She was apologizing for everything she had ever said and begging Eleanor to forgive her. Eleanor returned her call, and they arranged to meet for coffee. It was uncomfortable and difficult at first, but Charlotte was truly remorseful. She had not been aware of the truth about her brother. She had fallen for his lies, just as everyone else had fallen for his lies. The two of them developed an unexpected friendship. But it is often true that the people who understand you the most are the ones who have been hurt by the same person. At the same time, Raymond's cancer grew worse, but the bond between the father and daughter grew stronger. Eleanor made sure to visit him every Sunday. They would sit together in his study, reading letters from her mother. They discussed the past and the future, and all the moments in between. "I have been considering what I want to do next with my life," Eleanor mentioned to him on one of their Sunday visits. "And what conclusion have you reached?" he inquired. "I am returning to my old job. As a matter of fact, they have already offered me a promotion." Raymond lifted an eyebrow. "You are not interested in taking control of my empire?" Eleanor chuckled. "Not in the slightest. I am not a business mogul. I am a marketing director who is skilled at her job and enjoys the people she works with, and who wants to leave work at 5 o'clock so she can walk her dog." "You own a dog?" he asked. "I am getting one. He is a rescue animal. I have already picked him out at the shelter. His name is going to be Biscuit." Raymond smiled, a genuine smile that brightened his weary eyes. "Your mother would have loved that. She always hoped you would get a dog." "I know," she said quietly. She wrote about it in one of her letters. They sat together in a peaceful quiet, the type of silence that feels comfortable and comes from a place of true connection. "I'm so proud of you," Raymond said, "not because of the grant, or because of any of this mess. I'm proud of the person you have become." Eleanor felt tears form in her eyes and quickly blinked them away. "I am trying," she said. Every single day, I am trying to learn who I am when I am not someone's wife, someone's letdown, or someone's victim. You were never truly any of those things, he told her softly. You have always been Eleanor. You just lost sight of that for a little while. She reached out and held his hand. His grasp was not as strong as it had been 3 months before. The cancer was taking its toll, but his eyes looked peaceful. Thank you, she said, for all of it, for looking out for me, for being patient until I was ready, and for providing me with the means to save myself. You saved yourself, Eleanor. All I did was supply some resources. Even so, thank you, she insisted. He gently squeezed her hand. Thank you for allowing an old man a second chance. Raymond Calloway passed away quietly in his sleep 3 months after that day. Eleanor was holding his hand at the moment it happened. She had moved into his large estate for his last weeks, staying in the guest room and spending every moment she could at his bedside. They had talked for hours and hours during those final days, about her mother, about their past, and about the future that Raymond would not get to see. They talked about the errors they had both made in their lives, and they also talked about the forgiveness they had both been able to find. I do not feel afraid, Raymond told her, just 2 days before he died. I have made peace with your mother, with you, and with everything I have done. I am happy to hear that, she answered. Make a promise to me. Anything at all? Do not live your life constantly looking back. Do not allow regret to spoil the years that you have ahead of you. Live your life looking forward, Eleanor. That is the only thing I ask. She made the promise, and she truly meant it. 1 year later, Eleanor was sitting in her garden. Biscuit was asleep in a sunny spot near her feet. A cup of coffee was cooling on the table next to her. The morning was flawless, serene, and completely her own. She had sold her father's huge house and given most of his wealth to various charities. She only kept enough money to purchase a small cottage that had a garden, a space for Biscuit, and wonderful morning sunlight that poured through the kitchen windows. The company that Raymond had created was now in capable hands. She had appointed a chief executive officer she trusted, a person who held the same values about doing business ethically and giving to charity. She had a seat on the board but did not manage the day-to-day work. That was not her purpose in life. Her purpose was smaller and much more peaceful. A home with a garden and a loyal dog. It was a career that gave her a challenge but did not take over her life, and it was friends who had turned into her family. It was a kind of peace that she had to fight for and that she had truly earned. Mo was getting married the next month, and Eleanor was serving as the maid of honor. She had devoted the last 6 months to helping plan the wedding, debating over flower choices, and sampling 14 different kinds of cake. It felt ordinary. It felt wonderful. It felt like the life she was always meant to have. On some nights, when it was very late, she still found herself thinking about Grant. It was no longer with anger or even with sadness, but with a kind of detached curiosity about the man she once married. The man she once believed was her everything turned out to be a complete stranger. Now he was out of prison, living in some other state, working a job no one would ever notice. His powerful name was ruined, his business empire had crumbled, and his famous charm was exposed as the lie it always was. Eleanor never wished him harm. In fact, she did not wish him anything at all. He was just a person she knew a long time ago, a chapter in a book she had firmly closed. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mo. Let's do brunch tomorrow. I found the most awful bridesmaid dresses in history. You are going to absolutely hate them. Eleanor laughed and started to type her reply. I cannot wait. Bring on the ugly dresses. I have so many thoughts. She put her phone down, picked up her warm coffee, and just watched the little birds in her garden. A new understanding settled over her. She used to believe that asking for help was a sign of weakness, but now she knew it was a sign of wisdom. We all need someone to show us that the door was never really locked. And she finally realized that the person she had been waiting for, the one who would come and save her, was herself. The sun felt warm on her skin. Her dog, Biscuit, stretched, let out a big yawn, and went right back to sleep. Far away, a church bell softly chimed the hour. Eleanor smiled, having thinking about her mother's letters. She thought about all the milestones her mother had written about, but never got to see, like her graduation, her wedding day, and her big promotions. And then there was this moment, a quiet morning in her own garden, with a simple cup of coffee, a rescue dog named Biscuit, and a new life she had pieced back together after being betrayed. "I did it, Mom," Eleanor whispered to the air. "I found my way home." A gentle breeze moved through the flowers, and the birds continued their morning songs. And Eleanor Calloway sat right there in her garden, feeling complete, healed, and finally free. It was not because a hero rescued her, but because she had found the strength to rescue herself. If you have ever felt lost and alone in your own struggle, please know that you are not alone. This channel is a place where you belong. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below and share a piece of your own journey. Your story could be the one thing someone else desperately needs to read today. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Each week we share powerful stories about strength, survival, and the amazing power of change. Like this video if you believe that every person deserves to know their own worth. Share it with a friend who needs to hear this message. And now, for a brief final thought. This content has been thoughtfully researched, created, and carefully edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories with important life lessons. Every character, every moment, and every single word is chosen to inspire, to empower, and to remind you that no matter how difficult things get, your story is not finished yet. Thank you for being here with us today.